Tonight's Sleepbound episode is part 13 of Downton Abbey, and oh, it's a beautifully tangled one. This part touches everything: secret glances, quiet heartbreaks, and even a few bold declarations you might not expect. It made me smile more than once while recording it. There's a lovely balance here between the private moments and the growing undercurrents that will ripple through the rest of the story. Thank you so much for being here and allowing me to bring these peaceful evenings to life for you. Rest easy and sweet dreams. Chapter 8. Downstairs Machinations. The servants' hall at Downton Abbey offered rare moments of respite in the otherwise relentless rhythm of service. As afternoon tea concluded, most of the staff had dispersed to their various duties, leaving William alone with Bates at the long wooden table. The young footman's usually cheerful countenance was clouded with uncertainty as he gathered his courage. "Is Daisy going to the fair tonight? With the others?" William asked, his attempt at casualness belied by the nervous tapping of his fingers against the tablecloth. Bates looked up from his newspaper, his eyes kind. He had observed the footman's infatuation with the kitchen maid for months now, an innocent, awkward affection that reminded him of simpler times in his own life. "Why don't you ask her?" Bates suggested gently. "She needs taking out of herself." As he spoke, Bates noticed Thomas lingering just beyond the doorway, listening with poorly disguised interest. The valet's expression hardened. "What's it to you?" "Nothing," Thomas replied with calculated indifference, sauntering into the room as if he'd only just arrived. At that moment, Daisy appeared with a teapot, her slight figure momentarily framed in the doorway as she entered. William straightened, smoothing his livery jacket with a quick, nervous gesture. "Daisy, I was hoping," he began, his voice catching. "Would you like to come to the fair with me, Daisy?" Thomas interjected smoothly, his handsome features arranged in a charming smile. "There's a few of us going later on." The transformation in Daisy's demeanor was immediate and complete. Her eyes widened, a flush spreading across her cheeks as she clutched the teapot to her chest. "Do you mean it?" From the kitchen, Mrs. Patmore's voice shattered the moment. "Daisy, don't let it get cold." With a last, glowing look at Thomas, Daisy hurried away, her steps lighter than they had been in weeks. William's face fell, the light in his eyes extinguished, as suddenly as if someone had drawn a curtain. He dropped heavily into the chair by the piano and began to play a melancholy tune, his fingers finding solace in the familiar melody. Bates leaned toward Thomas, his voice barely above a whisper, but laden with contempt. "You bastard." Thomas merely smirked, sharing a conspiratorial glance with O'Brien, who had witnessed the exchange from her usual corner. "Can I help it if I'm irresistible?" he asked, the gleam in his eyes revealing his satisfaction at William's misery. The cruelty of the act was so deliberate, so unnecessary, that Bates felt a surge of genuine anger. Thomas's behavior was more than the usual jockeying for position that characterized life below stairs. This was calculated malice, the casual infliction of pain simply because he could. William continued to play, the mournful notes of the piano a stark counterpoint to Thomas's self-satisfied smirk. Bates watched the young man with concern. William's open nature and earnest manner made him particularly vulnerable in the piranha pool that the servants' hall could sometimes become. Thomas and O'Brien, with their alliance of shared cynicism, were dangerous opponents for someone as straightforward as William. Later that evening, as the servants prepared for their rare night of freedom, the excitement was coursing throughout the servants' quarters. Gwen had spent precious minutes arranging her hair just so, while Thomas had applied a discreet dab of brilliantine, the scent of it trailing him as he moved through the corridor. The small party, Thomas, William, Gwen, and Daisy, set out toward the village as dusk painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold. Daisy clung to Thomas's arm, her face alight with excitement and disbelief at her good fortune. William walked slightly apart, his hands thrust deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched against more than just the evening chill. "An evening of mystery," Thomas announced with theatrical flair as they walked the path to the village. Mrs. Hughes out on the tiles, all dolled up like a dog's dinner. Then Mr. Crawley hurries into the library with his lordship. "What are you suggesting?" Gwen challenged, her practical nature bristling at Thomas's insinuations. "Who knows?" Thomas replied with exaggerated innocence. "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio." William frowned, momentarily distracted from his misery. "Who's Horatio?" Thomas's laugh was sharp and mocking as he exchanged a glance with Daisy, who giggled reflexively, eager to be included in his amusement. The sound of her laughter at William's expense felt like salt in an open wound. They had reached the helter-skelter, its painted wooden structure spiraling toward the darkening sky. Children's shrieks of excitement mingled with the mechanical music of the fairground. "Come on, Daisy," Thomas urged, suddenly grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the steps. She followed willingly, her face flushed with pleasure at being singled out. Gwen hung back with William, her expression softening with sympathy as she watched his forlorn gaze follow Daisy. "Cheer up. It may never happen." "It already has," William replied bleakly. He turned to Gwen, genuine confusion in his eyes. "Who is Horatio?" Gwen had no answer for him. Together they watched as Thomas and Daisy spiraled down the helter-skelter, their laughter carried on the evening breeze. In that moment, William felt the vast gulf between himself and Daisy widen beyond all crossing. Thomas, for his part, felt the warm glow of victory as they descended, the adoration in Daisy's eyes as she looked up at him, the same adoration always absent in the eyes he most wished would look at him that way, provided a hollow substitute for genuine connection. But it was a game he played well, and the wounded expression on William's face was its own reward. For Thomas Barrow, raised in the shadow of his father's disgust and society's condemnation, power had become a worthy substitute for acceptance. If he could not be loved for who he was, he could at least be feared for what he could do. And in the carefully stratified world of service, information and manipulation were currencies as valuable as pounds and shillings. Daisy, breathless with excitement, clung to his arm as they rejoined the others. "That was wonderful. Can we go again?" "Anything for you," Thomas replied with practiced charm, avoiding William's gaze. The kitchen maid practically glowed under his attention, oblivious to its insincerity and to the quiet devastation it caused the footman who truly cared for her. The fairground lights twinkled against the deepening night sky as they moved through the crowds. In the distance, Mrs. Hughes could be seen walking with a stranger, a middle-aged man whose attentive manner suggested more than casual acquaintance. Thomas noted this with interest, filing away the information for future use. In his experience, everyone had secrets, and secrets were the most valuable currency of all in the world below stairs. Chapter 9. Unexpected Confidences. The servants' quarters at Downton Abbey occupied the highest floor of the great house, tucked beneath the sloping eaves where the summer heat lingered well into the evening. The narrow corridor, illuminated by a single gas lamp, stretched in austere functionality, a stark contrast to the opulence of the rooms below. Here, privacy was a luxury as rare as leisure, with thin walls and shared spaces marking the reality of service life. John Bates stood before Anna's door, balancing a tray with one hand while the other gripped his cane. He had taken unusual care with the meal's presentation, a covered dish of Mrs. Patmore's chicken soup, freshly baked bread, a small dish of custard, and most telling of all, a single daisy in a slender vase. He hesitated, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of his position. Men were forbidden in the women's corridor after hours, a rule enforced with particular vigor by Mrs. Hughes. Yet the housekeeper was absent tonight, and the other maids had gone to the fair. Anna, confined to her sickbed, and likely forgotten in the evening's excitement, would have no dinner unless he brought it. At least, that was the justification he offered himself. With a soft knock, he called through the closed door, "Anna, are you there?" Inside her room, Anna started at the unexpected voice. She had been reading, propped against her pillows, her hair loose around her shoulders in a golden cascade rarely seen by anyone at Downton. Quickly setting aside her book, she reached for her dressing gown and hastened to the door. "Mr. Bates?" Disbelief colored her voice as she pressed close to the wooden panel. "Can you open the door?" His tone carried an unusual urgency. Anna hesitated, acutely aware of her state of undress and the rules governing their positions. "I daren't. No one can open that door, except Mrs. Hughes." "Just for a moment," he persisted. "I've brought you something." The concern in his voice overcame her hesitation. Cautiously, she turned the key and opened the door, just enough to see him standing there, tray in hand. The corridor's dim light cast shadows across his face, but couldn't hide the warmth in his eyes as they met hers. "I don't know what she'd say," Anna murmured, glancing nervously down the empty hallway. "I do," Bates replied with a rueful smile. "But she's out for the evening and the others are down at the fair." Anna's grip on the door loosened slightly. "You should have gone with them. I was worried you'd be hungry." The simple statement carried a weight of meaning beyond its words. Anna's gaze dropped to the tray, taking in the carefully arranged meal, the pristine napkin, and the delicate flower in its vase. "I thought I'd been forgotten." "You'd never be forgotten by me." The words hung in the air between them, spoken with such quiet certainty that they seemed to alter the very atmosphere of the narrow corridor. In that moment, the careful boundaries they had maintained, the professional distance, the polite formality, wavered and thinned. Something unspoken yet profound passed between them, acknowledged in the softening of Anna's expression and the intensity of Bates's gaze. Anna reached for the tray, her fingers briefly brushing against his in the exchange. "It's so pretty." "An eye for detail. That's what I'm known for," he replied, his attempt at lightness belied by the emotion evident in his voice. A moment of charged silence followed, filled with possibilities neither dared articulate. Would he step closer? Would she invite him to? The air seemed to vibrate with unspoken words and ungiven touches. Then, a noise on the stairs. Anna started, the spell broken by the sudden reminder of where they stood and what rules they risked breaking. "You'd better go," she whispered urgently, "but thank you." "Thank you," Bates replied, though the words made little sense as a response. Yet they both understood gratitude not for the meal, but for the moment they had shared, for the connection that had deepened despite all the barriers placed between them. As Anna closed and locked the door, Bates remained motionless for a heartbeat longer, his hand raised as if to knock again. Then, with a quiet sigh, he turned and made his way back toward the stairs, his uneven gait echoing in the empty corridor. Inside her room, Anna set the tray carefully on her bedside table, her fingers lingering on the stem of the single flower. Such a small gesture, yet laden with meaning. In the butler's pantry, Carson might be cataloging the household silver, and in the drawing room, the family might be engaged in after-dinner conversation. But here, in this small, spare room beneath the eaves, a simple daisy held more value than all the treasures of Downton combined. She returned to her bed, the warmth of her illness now mingled with a different kind of heat, the flush of recognition that what she felt for John Bates was no longer the simple fondness of a colleague, nor even the admiration of a friend. It had deepened, transformed into something both wonderful and terrifying. A lady's maid could not love a valet. The complications were too numerous, the obstacles too great. Yet as she sipped the now cooling soup, Anna Smith knew with quiet certainty that her heart had already decided, heedless of the practical considerations that governed every other aspect of her life. Below stairs, the kitchen had fallen into rare quietude. Mrs. Patmore sat alone at the scrubbed wooden table, nursing a cup of tea and enjoying the blessed silence of an empty kitchen. No Daisy to scold, no hall boys underfoot, no endless parade of serving dishes to orchestrate. The subtle tap of Bates's cane announced his arrival before he appeared in the doorway. His expression, unusually contemplative, suggested his thoughts were elsewhere. "All on your own?" he inquired, moving to the kettle. "And isn't it a blessed relief?" Mrs. Patmore replied with feeling, stretching her feet beneath the table. After a day spent standing at the stove, even these few moments of respite were precious. Bates poured himself a cup of tea, his movements deliberate. "I was just wondering if anyone had taken Anna up some supper." Mrs. Patmore snorted, not fooled for a moment by his casual tone. "Well, if they haven't, she'll have to starve. I cannot put any more weight on these sad and aching feet tonight." Bates nodded, accepting this expected answer with equanimity. He had, after all, already solved the problem himself, though Mrs. Patmore's sharp eyes noted his recent absence and drew their own conclusions. "She's a good girl, Anna," the cook observed, testing the waters. "Sensible. Not one for flights of fancy or silly notions." "She is," Bates agreed, his voice carefully neutral. "The house runs smoother when she's well." Mrs. Patmore studied him over the rim of her cup, taking in the careful composure, the disciplined posture, and the telling softness around his eyes whenever Anna's name was mentioned. Servants weren't supposed to have private lives or personal feelings. The house and its inhabitants claimed their full devotion. Yet human hearts seldom followed such prescribed rules. "Best she gets better soon, then," was all she said, keeping her observations to herself. In the confined world below stairs, privacy was a rare and precious commodity, one Mrs. Patmore chose in this instance to respect. Bates finished his tea in thoughtful silence, then bid the cook good night. As he made his way back to his small room in the men's quarters, he found himself wondering about the exact nature of Mrs. Hughes's evening engagement. Had she too seized a rare opportunity for personal happiness? And if so, what courage that must have taken after so many years of putting duty before all else. The thought brought him back to Anna and the moment they had shared, brief, proper by any outward measure, yet transformative in its emotional significance. In a house governed by rigid rules and roles, they had connected as simply John and Anna, a man and a woman, acknowledging a growing affection that transcended their positions. Whether anything could come of such feelings remained uncertain. But for tonight, in the quiet of his room, John Bates allowed himself to hope. Perhaps the most daring act of all, for a man who had learned how swiftly life's fortunes could change. Chapter 10. Family Confrontations. The library at Downton Abbey served multiple purposes: a sanctuary for Robert, a repository of generations of knowledge, and, on this particular evening, the battlefield for a family confrontation that had been brewing since Matthew's arrival. The warm glow of the lamps cast long shadows across the room where Robert and Matthew sat in leather armchairs, glasses of whiskey in hand, the loyal Pharaoh stretched contentedly before the fire. "So, what did you say to Mama?" Robert asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Matthew had arrived unexpectedly after dinner, requesting a private word. His visit, coming so soon after Violet's trip to Ripon, left little doubt as to its purpose. "I haven't spoken to her since the visit," Matthew replied, "but I have looked through every source, and I can't find one reason to base a challenge." "I could have told you that." Robert's relief was evident in the relaxation of his shoulders, the slight softening around his eyes. Matthew leaned forward, his expression troubled. "I'm not quite sure how to phrase it when I tell her." "She shouldn't have put you on the spot like that," Robert said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "It was unkind. I'm afraid she'll think I've failed because I don't want to succeed." "She will think that," Robert acknowledged, "but I don't, and nor will Cora." Matthew stared into his drink, his next words coming with evident difficulty. "But of course it's impossible for Mary. She must resent me so bitterly, and I don't blame her." To Matthew's surprise, Robert appeared to find this declaration encouraging rather than distressing. Before he could respond, however, a familiar voice cut through the room like a blade. "Really? Well, if you can, you must have learned to very recently." Violet stood in the doorway, her imperious figure silhouetted against the light from the hall. Mary entered behind her, her expression a careful mask of neutrality that revealed nothing of her thoughts. Robert rose immediately, his momentary annoyance quickly concealed behind practiced civility. "Mother, we weren't expecting you." "Evidently," Violet replied, advancing into the room with regal purpose. "Yet here I am, and seemingly just in time to hear the results of Cousin Matthew's investigation." She fixed her penetrating gaze on Matthew. "Well?" Matthew stood, acutely aware of Mary's presence. To discuss her inheritance, or lack thereof, in front of her felt uncomfortably like debating a patient's prognosis at their bedside. "I've conducted a thorough review of the entail and the marriage settlement," he began carefully. And I must concur with Murray's assessment. The entail is binding, and I can find no legal grounds for challenging it. Violet's lips thinned in disappointment. You hardly seem to have tried. Mother, Robert interjected, Matthew has done exactly what you asked. If there were a way to break the entail, don't you think I would have found it years ago? I think you accepted defeat rather easily, Violet retorted, her tone sharp with accusation, as did Murray. Neither of you had a personal interest in proving it unbreakable. And Matthew does? Mary spoke for the first time, her voice cool and controlled. Surely his interest lies in the opposite direction. All eyes turned to her, standing poised and elegant in the doorway, her evening dress a deep burgundy that caught the firelight like liquid garnets. The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, yet there was something else beneath it, a certain weary resignation, as if she had expected this outcome all along. Precisely my point, Violet declared. If even Matthew, who stands to lose everything if the entail is broken, cannot find a legal challenge, then we must accept that it truly is unbreakable. So we are back where we started, Mary observed, her composure perfect save for the slight tightening of her hands against the folds of her dress. How refreshing to have wasted everyone's time so thoroughly. Robert moved toward his daughter, genuine concern in his expression. Mary, no one wishes more than I that the law allowed you to inherit. Don't you? Her gaze was direct, unflinching. Sometimes I wonder. A tense silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and Pharaoh's contented sigh as he shifted in his sleep. The family tableau, frozen in their respective positions of power, privilege, and disappointment, captured the essence of their dilemma. Tradition, embodied in Violet's rigid posture. Progress, in Matthew's uncomfortable awareness of his position. Authority, in Robert's caught-in-the-middle stance, and the cost of it all, written in the careful dignity of Mary's expression. Carson's discreet appearance at the door provided a welcome interruption. You rang for the car, my lady. Is that the time? Violet glanced at the mantel clock with exaggerated surprise. Where's Robert? He can't have been drinking port since we left, or he'll be under the table by now. His lordship's in the library, Carson replied. All alone? Oh, how sad. Violet's tone dripped with sarcasm. No, Carson began, only to be interrupted by Mary. We can say goodbye to Papa for you, Granny, she interjected smoothly, her gaze fixed meaningfully on the butler. Violet's eyes narrowed. He's what? Carson, caught between loyalty to his employer and his constitutional inability to mislead the Dowager Countess, capitulated. He's with Mr. Crawley, milady. Cousin Matthew is here? Violet's gaze swept from Carson to Mary. Did you know about this? No, but... Cora began, having just entered from the drawing room. Please tell Branson I shall be ready to leave in 10 minutes, Violet announced, already moving toward the library door. She paused, looking back at Mary with a pointed glance. But not before. With that, she swept from the room, leaving the others to follow in her formidable wake. In the library, Robert looked up as his mother entered, his expression a mixture of resignation and exasperation. Mamma, I thought you'd gone home. And miss this clandestine meeting. Violet settled herself in an armchair, fixing Matthew with a penetrating stare. Well, Cousin Matthew, It seems your investigation has been as thorough as it has been disappointing. I assure you, I've examined every legal precedent. Matthew replied, discomfort evident in his posture. The entail is binding. What I cannot understand in all this is you. Violet turned her formidable attention to her son. You seem positively glad to see Mary disinherited. You speak as if we had a choice, Robert began, his patience clearly wearing thin. Thank you, Branson, Violet declared abruptly, effectively cutting off further discussion as the chauffeur appeared at the door. Robert recognized the strategic retreat for what it was, his mother's refusal to concede defeat while lacking any further ammunition. As Branson closed the door behind them, Robert turned back to Matthew and Mary, who remained in the library. I'm worn out, he announced, the evening's tensions evident in the slump of his shoulders. Tell Lady Mary and Mr. Crawley I've gone to bed, he instructed Carson. Shall I tell them now, my lord? The butler inquired. Robert paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his features. No, wait until they ring. With that cryptic instruction, he departed, leaving Mary and Matthew alone in the library's warm glow. Mary moved to the bell pull, her fingers resting on the cord without pulling it. To break the entail, we'd need a private bill in Parliament. The question held a note of incredulity. Even then, it would only be passed if the estate was in danger, which it's not, Matthew explained, watching her with careful attention. And I mean nothing in all this. The statement held no self-pity, merely a flat acknowledgement of fact. On the contrary, you mean a great deal, Matthew countered, his voice lowering. A very great deal. The sincerity in his tone caused Mary to turn, truly meeting his gaze for the first time that evening. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of the impossible situation they both found themselves in. Neither had asked for the entail to define their relationship, yet it stood between them like an invisible wall. The moment lengthened, charged with words unspoken, until Mary finally tugged the bell pull. Carson appeared with practiced promptness. You rang, milady? Yes, Carson. Mr. Crawley was just leaving, Mary replied, her composure restored. After that, you can lock up. Do you know where his lordship is? Gone to bed, milady. He felt tired after he put Lady Grantham into the car. A ghost of a smile touched Mary's lips. I bet he did. Thank you, Carson. As the butler withdrew to fetch Matthew's coat, an awkward silence descended. Matthew searched for some words of comfort, some expression that might ease the tension between them. Sorry, I wish I could think of something to say that would help, he offered finally. There's nothing, Mary assured him, her voice softer than before. But you mustn't let it trouble you. It does trouble me, Matthew admitted, the intensity of his gaze conveying far more than his words. It troubles me very much. Then that will be my consolation prize, Mary replied, a hint of her usual sardonic humor returning. Good night, Cousin Matthew. She extended her hand, a formal gesture to signal the evening's end. Matthew took it, but instead of the brief touch custom dictated, he held it firmly, his thumb unconsciously brushing across her knuckles. The unexpected intimacy made Mary's breath catch almost imperceptibly. Good night, Matthew said finally, releasing her hand with evident reluctance. Mary withdrew a step, disconcerted by the intensity of his gaze, and more troublingly, by her own response to it. As Carson returned with Matthew's coat, she turned away, moving to the window where the night pressed dark against the glass. This complicated man, this unwanted heir who stood to take everything that should have been hers, should inspire nothing but resentment. Yet as the sound of his departing footsteps faded down the hall, Lady Mary Crawley found herself experiencing emotions far more complex and potentially far more dangerous than simple animosity. Chapter 11. Mrs. Hughes's Decision. The Grantham Arms, though modest by metropolitan standards, stood as the pinnacle of fine dining in Downton Village. Framed prints of pastoral scenes adorned walls of polished wainscoting, while crisp white tablecloths and gleaming silverware spoke to the establishment's aspirations. For Elsie Hughes, accustomed to overseeing far grander dining arrangements at the Abbey, the setting struck a comfortable balance, respectable without being intimidating. Joe Burns sat across from her, his weathered hands occasionally fidgeting with his napkin. They had finished their meal, a simple but well-prepared roast with vegetables, and now lingered over cups of tea. The conversation had flowed more easily than Elsie had anticipated, years falling away as they rediscovered the rhythms of their former connection. "It must have been so hard for you when Ivy died," she said, studying his face for signs of lingering grief. Joe nodded, his expression somber. "Took some getting used to. A farming life can be lonely." "What about your son? Do you see much of him?" Elsie asked, remembering the baby she had once held, now grown to manhood. "Number, that's it." Disappointment shadowed his features. "I would have given Peter a share in the farm if he wanted it, but he's joined the army." "Well, I never," Elsie murmured, surprised by this departure from rural tradition. "Oh, he seems happy," Joe conceded with a father's resigned acceptance. "That's the main thing." "I suppose it is," he agreed, his tone suggesting this was a conclusion reached after much private struggle. "But it's left me on my own." The statement hung between them, its implications clear. Joe's eyes, direct and honest as always, held a question he had yet to voice. "So how's life treated you?" he asked instead, clearly making an effort at casual conversation. Elsie considered her answer carefully. "Oh, I can't complain. I haven't traveled, but I've seen a bit of life and no mistake." A small smile curved her lips. "Then again, nothing's joy galore, is it?" "I notice you call yourself Mrs.," Joe observed. "Housekeepers and cooks are always Mrs.," she explained, though she knew he likely remembered this convention. "You know better than anyone I haven't changed my name." "Well, I know you wouldn't change it to Burns when you had the chance," he replied, his smile taking any sting from the words. Their eyes met across the table, history flowing between them like a current. The young farm girl she'd been, the hopeful farmer he was, and the proposal she had declined in favor of advancement at Downton. Life had carried them along separate rivers since then, yet here they sat, streams converging once more. Joe reached across the table, briefly covering her hand with his. "Come on, they'll be lighting the fare properly by now." As they stepped out into the cool evening air, the fairground beckoned with its kaleidoscope of lights and sounds. Joe offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and Elsie accepted it, conscious of curious glances from villagers who knew her only as the austere Mrs. Hughes, housekeeper of Downton Abbey. "I ought to start back," she said, suddenly aware of how far she had strayed from her usual routines. This is very late for me." "Ah, not yet," Joe countered with gentle persuasion. "It's a long time since I had a girl to show off for, at a fair." He guided her toward a ring toss game, paying the attendant and taking aim with determined concentration. As he threw, Elsie found herself studying him with new clarity. Joe Burns had aged well, his face creased by weather and work rather than bitterness, his manner still carrying that earnest decency she had admired in their youth. "So, I take it you never get lonely?" he asked, his attention ostensibly on the game. "Well, that's working in a big house," Elsie replied with practiced lightness. "There are times when you yearn for a bit of solitude." Joe's final toss hit its mark, and the stallholder presented him with a small prize, a scarecrow doll with button eyes and a stitched smile. He offered it to Elsie with a courtly bow. "Well, something to remind you of me." "I don't need help to remember you," she replied, accepting the doll with a warmth she hadn't intended to reveal. They continued through the fair, the conversation flowing naturally between reminiscence and observation. Yet beneath the easy exchanges, Elsie sensed the question building, the real purpose behind Joe's visit and this evening's outing. "But what happens when you retire?" he finally asked, his tone carefully casual. "I should think I'll stay here," she answered. "They'll look after me." "Suppose they sell the estate. Suppose there's a tidal wave," Elsie countered with sudden vigor. "Suppose we all die of the plague. Suppose there's a war." Her unexpected vehemence made them both laugh, breaking the tension of the moment. Yet the question remained, hovering unspoken between them, a future together, a second chance at a path not taken. From behind a nearby tent, unseen by Elsie, several Downton servants watched with undisguised curiosity. Thomas's smirk and whispered comments to Daisy, William's pained expression, Gwen's attempts at discretion, all part of the complex ecosystem of below-stairs life, where privacy was a rare commodity and interest in others' affairs, a natural pastime. But Elsie remained oblivious to their observation, her attention focused entirely on Joe and the life-altering question she sensed approaching. "I must go," she said finally, as the fair began to quiet. "But it's been lovely to see you again, Joe. Really." "And you know what I'm asking?" he replied, his gaze direct and unwavering. "You haven't asked anything yet. But you know what it is, when I do." The truth was, she undoubtedly did. The proposal hung between them, clear as if he had spoken it aloud. Joe's expression held both hope and apprehension, a man putting his heart at risk for the second time with the same woman. "I'm going to stop here at the pub till I hear from you," he continued, his voice gentle. "Oh, and take your time. I'd rather wait a week for the right answer than get a wrong one in a hurry. Think about it carefully." "I will," Elsie promised. "I promise you that." As she made her way back to Downton, the scarecrow doll tucked carefully in her pocket, Elsie Hughes found herself facing a crossroads she had never expected to encounter again. 20 years ago, she had chosen career over marriage, ambition over domesticity. That choice had shaped her life, bringing her to a position of responsibility and respect at one of England's great houses. Now, decades later, Joe Burns offered her a different path, a farmhouse instead of servants' quarters, a husband instead of employers, a private life instead of a professional one. The farm girl she had once been stirred somewhere deep inside the housekeeper she had become, raising questions long since settled. Was she still Elsie underneath the mantle of Mrs. Hughes? And if so, what did Elsie truly want from the remaining years of her life? With these thoughts circling in her mind, she climbed the servants' staircase to her room, passing Thomas and O'Brien on her way. Their curious glances suggested gossip had already begun to spread, but for once, Mrs. Hughes found herself indifferent to the whispers of the servants' hall. Tonight, she had more personal matters to contemplate. In her sitting room, she carefully placed the Scarecrow doll on her desk, its whimsical simplicity incongruous against the ledgers and household accounts that represented her life's work. It stood as a tangible reminder of a choice she had made once before, and now had the chance to make differently. As the great house settled around her, Elsie Hughes allowed herself a rare moment of purely personal contemplation, not as the keeper of Downton's domestic order, but as a woman facing the unexpected gift of a second chance at love. Chapter 12. Diagnoses and Humiliations. Morning sunlight filtered through Downton Village's winding streets as Isabel Crawley and a clearly uncomfortable Molesley made their way toward the cottage hospital. The fair, now quiet in the morning hours, presented a strangely abandoned appearance. Canvas stalls limp, rides motionless, devoid of the previous evening's excitement and crowd. Molesley walked slightly behind Isabel, his hands held awkwardly away from his body. The skin had worsened overnight, angry red inflammation now spreading from his hands up his forearms. Despite his attempts to conceal his discomfort, each step betrayed his misery. "How is the tincture working?" Isabel inquired, her brisk pace forcing Molesley to quicken his steps. "Not making much difference, I'm afraid, ma'am," he replied, trying to mask his distress with stoic politeness. Isabel's brow furrowed in professional concern. "The symptoms do seem to be progressing rather than improving. Erysipelas can be quite persistent, but I'm confident Dr. Clarkson will confirm my diagnosis and perhaps suggest an additional treatment." Molesley nodded, too uncomfortable to argue. The truth was, he cared less about the specific diagnosis than finding relief from the constant burning sensation. His duties as Matthew's valet required dexterity and precision, qualities significantly hampered by hands that felt as though they'd been thrust into nettles. They arrived at the hospital, a modest stone building that stood as testament to the Grantham family's local philanthropy for generations. Inside, the familiar antiseptic smell greeted them, along with the hushed tones of a medical establishment. Isabel led the way to Dr. Clarkson's office with the confidence of someone thoroughly at home, not bothering to wait for a nurse's announcement. Her position as chairman of the hospital board had, in her mind, erased the usual formalities required of visitors. The door swung open to reveal an unexpected scene. Dr. Clarkson seated at his desk, and across from him, Violet Crawley, Dowager Countess of Grantham, engaged in what appeared to be a pleasant conversation. Both looked up at the intrusion, Dr. Clarkson rising immediately, while Violet remained seated, her eyebrows arched in mild surprise. "Mrs. Crawley, how nice," Dr. Clarkson greeted, his tone suggesting it was anything but. The tension between the hospital's traditional management and Isabel's reforming zeal was an open secret in the village. Isabel hesitated momentarily, thrown by Violet's presence in what she considered her domain. "You're busy. We can come back." But Violet's sharp eyes had already spotted Molesley hovering behind Isabel, his raw, inflamed hands impossible to miss. "Molesley, what are you doing here? Are you ill?" "Poor Mr. Molesley," Dr. Clarkson interjected, clearly recognizing the man's condition. "How's it going?" "The solution doesn't seem to make it any better," Isabel replied, professional pride overcoming her initial discomfort at Violet's presence. "My imagination is running riot," Violet declared, making no move to depart and clearly settling in for whatever medical drama was about to unfold. Molesley shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. "I've got erysipelas, milady." "Oh, I am sorry," Violet replied, though her tone suggested more curiosity than sympathy. Dr. Clarkson turned to Isabel with professional courtesy. "Mrs. Crawley tells me she's recommended nitrate of silver and tincture of steel." "Is she making a suit of armor?" Violet inquired, the barb delivered with such perfect dryness that even Molesley had to suppress a smile. "It is the treatment I would have recommended myself, Doctor," Clarkson acknowledged diplomatically. "But I take it there's no improvement?" "Not really," Molesley confirmed, unconsciously turning his hands back and forth as he examined the worsening rash. Violet's gaze sharpened, focusing intently on Molesley's hands. "And you're sure it's erysipelas?" "That is Mrs. Crawley's diagnosis," Dr. Clarkson replied, carefully neutral. "What it is to have medical knowledge," Violet observed, her tone suggesting precisely the opposite. "It has its uses," Isabel countered, bristling at the implied criticism. Violet rose from her chair, approaching Molesley with unexpected interest. I see your father has been making changes at home." The abrupt change of subject momentarily confused everyone in the room. Molesley blinked in surprise. "He has. He's got no use for the herb garden now me mother's gone, so he's putting it to grass." "And you have been helping him?" Violet pressed, her eyes never leaving his hands. "I have," Molesley confirmed, increasingly puzzled by this line of questioning. Grubbing out the old rue hedge, Molesley's eyes widened in astonishment. "How did you know that?" A satisfied smile spread across Violet's features, the expression of a chess player declaring checkmate. "Because this is not erysipelas. This is a rue allergy. If Molesley wears gardening gloves, it'll be gone in a week." She turned to Isabel, delivering her coup de grace with precision. "You weren't to blame. I know you are unfamiliar with the country and its ways." Isabel stood frozen, the color rising in her cheeks as the implications of Violet's diagnosis sank in. All her medical knowledge, her professional confidence, upended by a dowager countess with no formal training. "I stand corrected," Dr. Clarkson murmured, examining Molesley's hands with renewed understanding. "Please don't think we're ungrateful for your enthusiasm, Mrs. Crawley," Violet continued, her victory complete. "But there comes a time when things are best left to the professionals." "But Isabel began, searching for some defense. "I may have no training," Violet interrupted smoothly, "but I'm a great believer in common sense. And now I really must go. Good day." With that, she swept from the room, leaving behind a stunned silence broken only by Molesley's heartfelt, "Thank you, your ladyship." Isabel remained motionless, her carefully constructed identity as Downton's medical authority crumbling around her. The humiliation was complete, administered not in private, but before Dr. Clarkson and a servant, ensuring the story would spread throughout both the hospital and the great house by nightfall. "Well," Dr. Clarkson said finally, clearing his throat, "it seems we have our answer, Mr. Molesley. Simple gardening gloves should resolve the issue quickly." "Thank you, Doctor," Molesley replied, relief evident in his voice. He turned to Isabel, genuine gratitude in his expression despite the misdiagnosis. "And thank you, Mrs. Crawley, for your concern. I do appreciate it." His kindness only deepened Isabel's mortification. To be pitied by a servant after such a public correction was perhaps the bitterest aspect of the entire episode. "Yes, well," she managed, gathering the tattered remains of her dignity. "One must always be willing to learn, even from unexpected sources." As they departed the hospital, walking back through the village in uncomfortable silence, Isabel Crawley engaged in a fierce internal struggle. The rational part of her acknowledged that Violet's diagnosis was correct. The evidence was undeniable. Yet her pride rebelled against the manner of the correction, delivered with such deliberate satisfaction by a woman who seemed to view their every interaction as combat. Molesley, sensing her distress, attempted conversation about the weather, the fair, anything to diffuse the tension. Isabel responded with distracted monosyllables, her mind already constructing defenses against the inevitable gossip. By the time they reached Crawley House, Isabel had achieved a fragile equilibrium. Yes, she had been wrong, a professional embarrassment certainly. But in the greater scheme of medical errors, diagnosing a rue allergy as erysipelas hardly constituted a grave injustice. Molesley would recover quickly, and lessons had been learned on all sides. "Thank you for accompanying me, Molesley," she said as they reached the gate. "Please do wear gloves as recommended, and let me know if there's any change in your condition." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am," he replied, relief evident in every line of his posture. Watching him walk away, Isabel squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. One humiliation, however public, would not deter her from her purpose at Downton. She had faced far worse challenges during her nursing career, weathered far more significant professional storms. Violet Crawley might have won this particular skirmish, but Isabel Crawley had no intention of conceding the larger war. Next time, she promised herself, entering her home with renewed determination, she would be better prepared. Next time, the victory would be hers. Chapter 13. Changing Perspectives. The morning air carried the crisp scent of newly turned earth and fresh timber as Robert and Matthew inspected the row of cottages under renovation. Pharaoh trotted contentedly alongside them, occasionally pausing to investigate interesting scents in the hedgerows. In the distance, Downton Abbey stood against the horizon, its golden stone glowing in the morning light, a silent reminder of the estate's permanence amid the changing seasons of human endeavor. Robert observed the workmen with evident satisfaction. Carpenters replaced rotted beams, masons repointed crumbling mortar, and laborers cleared decades of neglect from gardens that would soon flourish again. The project, initially Matthew's suggestion, had evolved into a shared vision, one that connected present stewardship to both past obligations and future responsibilities. "They're doing a good job," Matthew remarked, running an appreciative hand over newly installed window frames. "I think so," Robert agreed, pleased by his heir's enthusiasm. "They'll see me out, and with any luck, you." A comfortable silence settled between them as they continued their inspection. The awkwardness that had characterized their early interactions had gradually transformed into a genuine rapport. still occasionally strained by their different backgrounds, but increasingly marked by mutual respect. "I hope Cousin Violet has recovered from last night," Matthew ventured, referring to the Dowager's dramatic exit following their discussion of the entail. Robert chuckled, the sound echoing against the cottage walls. "Whatever she says, my mother is as strong as an ox, and it's high time she let go of her scheme for upsetting everything." He glanced at Matthew with rare candor. "Time we all did." "I can't deny I'm pleased to hear you say it," Matthew admitted, relief evident in his expression. Robert paused, studying his air with thoughtful consideration. "Are you beginning to see a future here, then?" The question hung between them, simple words that encompassed complex implications. Matthew's answer would reveal far more than his practical plans. It would indicate his emotional investment in Downton itself. "In a way, this latest business has forced me to recognize that I do want Downton to be my future," Matthew confessed, his gaze traveling across the estate lands spread before them. "I'm glad," Robert replied, the simple statement containing volumes of unspoken approval. Matthew's lips curved in a self-deprecating smile. "You must have thought me an awful prig when I first arrived." "Not a prig," Robert corrected gently. "Just a man thrust into something he never wanted or envisaged, clinging for dear life to his old certainties." Matthew laughed, recognizing the accuracy of the assessment. "I could only see the absurdity of the whole thing." He broke off, suddenly conscious of potential offense. "I'm sorry." "Well, there are absurdities involved, as I know well enough," Robert acknowledged with surprising candor. In that moment, standing amid the renovated cottages that symbolized both tradition and progress, the Earl and his unexpected heir found common ground in their shared responsibility to Downton, a responsibility neither had sought, yet both now embraced. "I was determined not to let it change me," Matthew continued, warming to the theme. "It was absurd. If you don't change, you die." "Do you think so?" Robert's question held genuine curiosity. "I'm not sure. Sometimes I think I hate change." The admission revealed more of Robert's inner thoughts than he typically allowed, a glimpse of the private man beneath the Earl's composed exterior. Matthew recognized the rare gift of such honesty and responded in kind. "At least, we can comfort ourselves. This will still be here," he said, slapping the freshly restored cottage wall with gentle affection. "Because we saved it." Together, they surveyed the countryside surrounding them, the fields and forests, the village nestled in the valley, the great house standing sentinel over it all. The estate existed on a timescale beyond individual lives, yet remained entirely dependent on human care and foresight. "Old Cripps wasn't keen on the expense," Robert remarked as they continued their tour, referring to his estate manager's initial objections to the renovation project. "Some would argue it's not economically viable," Matthew acknowledged. "But surely the estate's responsibility extends beyond mere profit and loss." Robert nodded, pleased by this understanding. "Precisely. These cottages represent generations of commitment, the Crawley family's pledge to those who work this land." "A pledge worth honoring," Matthew agreed. As they turned back toward the house, Robert found himself studying his heir with newfound appreciation. When Matthew had first arrived at Downton, his middle-class values and professional ambitions had seemed almost foreign, at odds with the aristocratic traditions the estate embodied. Yet over time, Matthew had revealed a depth of character and principle that aligned remarkably well with the true spirit of noblesse oblige. Perhaps, Robert reflected, Downton needed precisely this blend of perspectives, the weight of tradition tempered by fresh eyes, ancestral obligation energized by modern efficiency. Perhaps Matthew Crawley, initially an unwelcome necessity, might prove the very steward Downton required for the challenges of a new century. The thought brought unexpected comfort as they crested the rise that offered the finest view of the estate. Below them, Downton Abbey stood in sunlit splendor, its windows catching the morning light like facets of a jewel. Home, legacy, responsibility. The great house represented different things to each man walking the path toward it, yet increasingly it united them in common purpose. "You know," Robert said, breaking the companionable silence, "you remind me occasionally of my father." Matthew looked startled, clearly uncertain whether this constituted compliment or criticism. "He had an excellent head for business," Robert continued, "combined with an unwavering sense of duty to the estate. Not always the easiest combination, but ultimately the right one." "I'm honored by the comparison," Matthew replied sincerely. Pharaoh, tiring of the slow human pace, bounded ahead toward home, his enthusiasm drawing a smile from both men. They followed at a more measured pace, the conversation turning to practical matters of estate management, crop rotations, tenant leases, drainage improvements. Yet beneath these mundane topics flowed a deeper current of shared understanding. For Robert, it was the gradual acknowledgement that Downton's future might be secure in hands different from, yet not inferior to, his own. For Matthew, it was the growing recognition that inheriting Downton meant accepting not only its privileges, but its profound responsibilities to the land, to its people, and to the generations yet to come. As the great house drew nearer with each step, both men, in their different ways, felt the weight and wonder of their shared stewardship. Downton had stood for centuries, and would stand for centuries more, changed, adapted, yet fundamentally the same. And in that permanence amid change lay a profound comfort neither had anticipated when their paths first intersected. Chapter 14. Lady Sybil's Statement. The drawing room at Downton Abbey presented its usual evening tableau. The family gathered before dinner, Carson standing sentinel by the drinks tray, the soft glow of lamps creating pools of warmth against the darkening April evening. Lord and Lady Grantham, elegantly attired, made polite conversation with Matthew and Isabel Crawley, while Mary and Edith maintained their customary armed neutrality, separated by strategic placement of furniture. "Whatever is holding Sybil up?" Cora inquired, glancing at the mantel clock with mild concern. Mary lifted one shoulder in an elegant shrug. She was banging on about her new frock. "We'd better go in without her," Robert suggested, "or it's not fair on Mrs. Patmore." Violet, seated regally in her customary chair, arched an eyebrow. "Is her cooking so precisely timed? You couldn't tell." The barb, aimed at the household management rather than the cook herself, visibly irritated Cora. Before she could respond, Isabel leapt to the defense of the absent Mrs. Patmore. "I think her food is delicious." "Naturally," Violet replied, the single word conveying volumes about the perceived simplicity of middle-class tastes. "Here she comes," Matthew announced, his gaze drawn to the doorway. All heads turned as the door opened to reveal Lady Sybil Crawley. The collective intake of breath was audible in the sudden silence that fell across the drawing room. Instead of the expected evening gown, Sybil stood before them, wearing flowing emerald green silk trousers, paired with a coordinating tunic that extended to mid-thigh. The outfit, clearly inspired by the oriental designs of Léon Bakst for the Ballets Russes, was both elegant and utterly shocking in the context of Downton Abbey. "Good evening, everyone." Sybil greeted them cheerfully, apparently oblivious to the bombshell effect of her entrance. The stunned silence continued, broken only by the soft tick of the mantel clock. Robert's face had frozen in an expression of horrified disbelief, while Cora's mouth formed a perfect O of astonishment. Violet gripped the arms of her chair, as if physically bracing against this assault on tradition. Edith's eyes widened with a mixture of shock and reluctant admiration, while Mary's lips curved in the faintest hint of amusement. Only Matthew managed a smile, equal parts surprise and appreciation for Sybil's daring. "My dear girl," Robert finally managed, his voice strained. "What on earth are you wearing?" "Do you like it?" Sybil turned gracefully, allowing the silk to flow around her. "It's a harem pant ensemble, inspired by Poiret and the Ballets Russes. Madame Swann was terribly excited to make something so modern." "I should think she was," Violet muttered, finding her voice at last. "No doubt it will be her last commission in Yorkshire." "Sybil, darling," Cora intervened, struggling to maintain her composure. "While it's certainly striking, perhaps it's not quite appropriate for dinner." "Why not?" Sybil challenged, her expression shifting from excitement to defiance. "Men wear trousers to dinner. Why shouldn't women be comfortable too?" "Because tradition," Robert began, only to be interrupted by his youngest daughter. "Tradition changes, Papa. 20 years ago, women were still wearing bustles. And at least then one could tell which way they were facing," Violet observed dryly. Sybil's chin lifted, a gesture reminiscent of Mary at her most stubborn. "I think it's elegant and practical. The designer Paul Poiret says women should be able to move freely, not be bound up in corsets and petticoats like prisoners. I hardly think comparing centuries of feminine attire to prison garb is helpful, Sybil," Robert replied, his initial shock hardening into displeasure. An uncomfortable silence fell. The family tableau had transformed from its usual ordered harmony into something more resembling a theatrical standoff, tradition and modernity facing each other across an unbridgeable divide. "Well," Cora said finally, her tone deliberately light, "shall we go in to dinner? Mrs. Patmore's efforts shouldn't go to waste, whatever we're wearing." The conciliatory gesture, though gracious, did little to diffuse the tension. As the family filed toward the dining room, the rigid set of Robert's shoulders and Violet's compressed lips suggested the matter was far from settled. Outside in the gathering darkness, Tom Branson lingered near the drawing room windows, his figure concealed by shadows. The chauffeur's duties for the evening were complete, the Dowager Countess safely delivered, the car polished and garaged, yet still he remained. Drawn by an impulse he knew was both foolish and dangerous. Through the illuminated windows, he had witnessed Lady Sybil's dramatic entrance and the family's shocked reaction. A smile of genuine admiration curved his lips as he observed her defiant stance Such courage, such willful challenge to convention, qualities rare in any class, but particularly unexpected in the sheltered youngest daughter of an earl. Their conversation during the drive to Ripon had revealed more than just her interest in women's rights. There was a genuine curiosity in her questions about Ireland, about politics, about his own background. Unlike her father or grandmother, she had listened not with polite condescension, but with real engagement. "Mr. Branson!" The stern voice startled him from his reverie. Mrs. Hughes stood at the corner of the house by the service courtyard, her expression a mixture of concern and disapproval. Branson stepped quickly back from the window, heat rising in his face at being caught in such an inappropriate position. Spying on the family, for that was how it would be interpreted, constituted grounds for immediate dismissal. "Don't play with fire, Mr. Branson," Mrs. Hughes warned, her Scottish accent more pronounced in her emotion, "or you'll get burned." Her words contained more insight than he had expected. The housekeeper had evidently observed enough to understand that his interest extended beyond mere curiosity about the family's reaction to Lady Sybil's outfit. The knowledge was unsettling. "Yes, Mrs. Hughes," he replied, careful to keep his tone neutral. "I was just checking that all the curtains were drawn properly." They both knew it was a lie, transparent and futile. Mrs. Hughes studied him for a long moment, her expression softening slightly. "You seem a decent young man," she said finally, "with prospects beyond service, if you're sensible. Don't throw away your future on impossible dreams." The gentle warning, delivered without condescension, touched Branson more deeply than a harsh reprimand would have. Mrs. Hughes understood the rigid boundaries of their world, boundaries that separated not just servants from masters, but Irish from English, Catholic from Protestant, radical from conservative. "I understand, Mrs. Hughes," he acknowledged, his gaze dropping to avoid her perceptive eyes. "See that you do." With that, she turned and walked toward the servants' entrance, leaving Branson alone with the weight of her warning. He cast one last glance toward the drawing-room windows, now distant and unreachable. Inside, Lady Sybil Crawley dined with her family, her green silk trousers a declaration of independence that resonated with his own deeply held beliefs. Outside, Tom Branson stood in darkness, separated from her world by barriers far more substantial than glass and stone. Yet as he turned toward his cottage, Branson found himself unable to dismiss the connection he had felt during their conversation about politics and women's rights. Lady Sybil possessed a rare quality, the willingness to question the very foundations of the world she inhabited. In that questioning lay the seed of something Branson had not expected to find at Downton Abbey: possibility. Mrs. Hughes was right, of course. Playing with fire led to burns, sometimes devastating ones. But as he walked through the cool spring night, Tom Branson couldn't help wondering if some fires, however dangerous, might be worth the risk. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. I hope this story has brought you a little peace and relaxation. As always, feel free to drift off whenever you're ready.
Did I make the most of loving you? So many things we didn't do. Did I give you all my heart could give? To unlived lives with lives to live. When these endless lonely days are through, I'll make the most of loving you. I'll most of loving you. Did we make the most of all we had? Not seeing you makes my heart sad. Did we make the most of summer days? We still have time to change our ways. When these endless lonely days are through, I'll make the most of loving you. 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 Did those tender words stay in my head? So many things were left unsaid. Did I give you all my heart could give? To unlived lives with lives to live. When these endless lonely days are through, I'll make the most of loving you. I'll make the most of loving you. I'll make the most of loving you. I'll make the most of loving you.